just repeated his ad. Yeah. He's like, why is the economy seemingly crashing for the average person right after doing an AI ad talking about like how productivity can skyrocket and displace the pre-existing labor force. What is this? Why you don't matter anymore? How money works?
Week, the U.S. shocked economists with a report that contained results they were not really expecting. The economy had grown at a shocking 3.8% pace in the second quarter, seemingly putting to rest all of the concerns that the naysayers had about a softening job market, trade wars, the cost of living, skyrocketing defaults, declining labor force participation, sector-wide crises, and slowing productivity. Sounds great, right? Well, as you might have already guessed, there is a lot to unpack from these numbers. GDP isn't a flawless measure, even in normal times, and I'm sure you have probably noticed there is a lot going on at the moment. But if you do what nobody else wants to do and actually read the data behind these figures, it tells three very interesting stories that challenges a lot of assumptions that we have about how our economy should work. This goes well beyond just simply growing inequality. That's not exactly shocking news anymore. But if you are looking for a sign of just how healthy and balanced the current market is, a new report has revealed that there are now more private equity firms in America than there are McDonald's. And the reason is very simple. If all of these numbers needed a headline, it would probably be, "You don't matter anymore." Economically speaking, of course.
GDP report showing that the U.S. economy expanded at 3.8%, surpassing the forecast growth of 3.3%.
36% of consumers say they've had trouble paying in just the last week.
Dude, you don't understand. Things are great, dude. Things are awesome. You're so silly. You're so dumb. The economy is expanding. How can you complain? The stock market's doing relatively fine, except for yesterday. Things have never been better. We are the hottest country from the standpoint of heat. We are the hottest country. We are winning. We're winning so hard.
So that is up 25% compared to the same time period a year ago.
So you have to go to your landlord.
Yeah, I did. I assume, did you see the report that said if you don't count data centers, the GDP only rose by 0.1% in the first half of this year? I did see that report, and I suspect this is actually going to talk about that exact report. 99.9% of GDP growth this year has come from data centers and AI. We're so cooked. GDP in and of itself is already not a reliable metric to understand the health of the overall economy. I say this all the time, and people yell at me and say, oh, dude, here we go. Socialist doesn't understand economics. It's like, I think we're human beings. We're not widgets. We're human beings, okay? Not to get too philosophical here, but I think the health of the overall economy and the way that people actually experience it is very different than the GDP. Is very different than the stock market. The stock market is not a healthy measure of how the economy is being experienced by the average person. The greatest example that I always love using, not the dog shit one. The dog shit one is for the GDP. Remember, two economists walking into the forest and eating dog shit. That's a GDP analogy. But the greatest example I always use is if you look at stock performance, for example, in the aftermath of a merger, what happens? Mass layoffs. Mass layoffs happen after a company merges with another one, okay? Mass layoffs mean a ton of people losing their jobs. And yet, the stock performance of the company is great. They have now eliminated redundancy. The elimination of redundancies looks great on your stock portfolio, but it actually means tens of thousands of people have lost their jobs. So how can you tell me that the stock market is a valid barometer for how people experience the world? It is one of the most insane ways that we have deluded ourselves into thinking about how things should be. It's base-boosted capitalism that robs the humanity of every single individual. Oh, it makes no sense.
And say, I don't know how I'm going to pay you. I've never had to do that.
Trillions of dollars are pouring into the United States for investment purposes.
The U.S. economy grew faster than expected between April and June.
So yeah, that wasn't a typo. There are now 19,000 private equity funds in the US and only 14,000 McDonald's locations. The statistic was originally high.
Chinese GDP. I make a product. I sell a product for $100. I have now added $100 to the GDP. American GDP. I make a product for $100. I sell the rights of the product for $100. I purchase graphic card usage rights back from them for $100. I have now added $300 to the GDP. Now, this is to talk about like the little bubble, the AI bubble. Okay, this is a way to explain the AI bubble. But I think it's far worse when you think about healthcare. I always go back to healthcare because it's like one of the most obvious points of pain for the average American. Okay, because the entirety of the private healthcare system is just a bloated middleman with no interest in actually keeping costs low at all. It does not need to exist. It's just fake. It's fake. We built it, we designed it just so a middleman can make money. And it's not even like all the workers in that middleman sector that are making money. It's the owners that are making money. It's just completely made up. Yeah, Americans like to say tofu construction. Tofu dreg construction when talking about China. We have a tofu economy. We have the tofu dreg economy, okay? There is no need for this expensive, bloated middleman to exist at all. Literally, there is no need for it at all. It makes no sense. Everything is built around con men conning one another. Bro, during COVID, I made 32 an hour. Do you want me to make 30 an hour or something? Exactly. Like, if you were to use Andrew as an example, okay, let's say you make $30 an hour instead of $32 an hour. But in the same time frame, because this is now a nationalized service, things are cheaper. The government has a higher priority to offer a better point of service and therefore actually has to hire a bunch more nurses, right? Or a bunch more healthcare professionals that actually are doing the healthcare, not the pencil pushers. All of a sudden, you're doing $30 an hour. Things are cheaper overall, and you get to work less. It's not as stressful, and you get to provide better care to your patients. I make way more than that now, thank God. You get the point. I think most people would agree with that.
Highlighted by Elisa Wood, a partner at one of the biggest private equity firms in the world. Ironies aside though, the reason this is happening is because there is just more opportunity in serving investment products to a few thousand ultra high net worth individuals and institutions than there is in serving burgers to millions of everyday Americans. As an economic participant, you really only have 3 jobs as far as these numbers are concerned. You can work, you can invest, and you can consume. So do keep this in mind as we jump into the numbers because there are really 3 big problems with a lot of our assumptions. The first problem is what this impressive economic growth figure is actually based on. GDP is normally calculated by summing together household consumption, investment, government spending, and exports, and then subtracting total imports. When the Bureau of Economic Analysis says that—
Yeah, this doesn't factor in unlimited billions to Israel. This is failing to factor in one of the most significant parts of America's existence, okay? The Israel tax.
The economy is growing at 3.8%. They do this calculation for a quarter, compare the difference to last quarter, and then
before
multiply
people
it
get
by
like really, all the econ guys get really annoying about it. I'm joking.
4 to get an annualized figure. If you are so inclined, they publish the individual breakdowns of all of these numbers, and if you did look closely at the most recent report, there is one number buried deep in the data that really puts this promising headline into perspective. In Q1 of this year, imports into America spiked by over 38% from the quarter before. This was mostly because big retailers wanted to stock up on inventory before tariffs took effect so they could remain cost competitive for a few more months. But in Q2, after they had already filled all of their warehouses, they didn't need to bring in more inventory from overseas, so imports dropped by over 29%. Now remember, when the economists do their calculations, they subtract imports. So on paper, a crash in import volume is actually good for GDP numbers. In reality though, international trade swinging this wildly over 6 months in the biggest economy in the world is not great. But it gets worse. Within the same report, it is noted that this large drop in imports actually bolstered GDP by over 5%. What this means in plain English is that if we ignored the wild swings in import volumes, GDP would have actually shrunk by 1.2% at an annualized rate. Now, as a small little side note, the
root of these problems is ultimately capitalism, but it does feel like the financialization of capitalism made it infinitely worse. Yes, but the financialization of capitalism is just more capitalism. It was an inevitability that finance capital would take over. the notion, for the layman, the notion that like every single producer, every single sector has turned into a fucking bank. Okay? Boeing used to make planes. Okay? Maybe spacecraft. Shit like that. And you would look at the fundamentals, right? You would look at how many planes they were making, what the cost of that was, with the wages and everything else, with the materials, goods, whatever. And then you would look to the performance of Boeing as opposed to like other international competitors and whatnot. And that's how you analyze what the valuation of Boeing is. Obviously, there's a lot of other factors involved in this as well. I'm not getting into everything. Okay. I'm looking at the super reductive. Now it's not. Now it's a bank. Every company is a bank. Every big corporation now is a fucking bank. Okay? If the ultimate goal is to boost shareholder value, then companies are going to do everything in their power to make sure that they can redesign the system to not necessarily care about its output, not necessarily care about like building new products or innovation, and instead move numbers around. Because ultimately, that's all this is about. Your universities are a bank. Boeing is now a bank. Everything is bank. Everything is not computer. Everything is bank. Year over year, we remove the pretense of the responsibility companies have to their consumers and shift out the shareholders who often own stakes in actors who are supposedly competing with each other. Competition is discouraged and the whole idea of capitalism falls apart. Of course, it is natural and perfectly understandable for every single company to be the first to market and monopolize. That is the reason why there needs to be trust busting and regulation from the government. But of course, when you have this massively powerful class interest coming from capital owners, they will do everything in their power to make sure that the government never regulates adequately. And without that sort of regulation, without that sort of trust busting, without that sort of like expansive, unlimited free market competition that is supposed to exist, through a process of vertical and horizontal integration, every single company becomes a monopoly. Every single company tries to at least become a monopoly. That's it. You have sectors that have a natural proclivity towards becoming a monopoly because it's like unimaginably costly to enter that market. You know, there are plenty of sectors like that for sure, which I think should be nationalized already. Airlines a good example of this as well. Like without heavy regulation and heavy intervention from the state, these companies are always going to become a monopoly. They do not want competition. Nobody wants competition. It is the greatest lie that capital owners have ever told the average layman, the average everyday working man. The notion that they want competition, the notion that capitalism fosters competition and therefore innovation. They do not. They never wanted competition. They would always use that as a counter example to be like, well, if the state actually interferes in the competition, in the competitive process, which is neoliberalism, okay? Because the state does actually interfere in competition at the behest of private enterprise all the fucking time. But ultimately, every single company just wants to be a monopoly. Because at that point, they can just slowly but surely make the services shittier and also up the prices. You are here now. You are experiencing that right now. That's why things get shittier and shittier year over year. The products that you consume are improved a little bit. Okay? Am I effing again? Jesus Christ, dude. What a spectacular time for me to talk about enshittification and monopolies. There you have it. Well, this is proof in the pudding, okay? This is it. This is literally it. This is a great example of it, okay?
Quarters of negative GDP growth, I'm sure the comment section can tell you what that's an indication of. Now, you might think a little glitch in the reporting process still shouldn't have this much of an impact on the performance of the entire economy, right? And you would be absolutely correct. Over 2/3 of the American economy depends on just this part here. Personal consumption now accounts for 68% of all of our economic activity, well above most other advanced economies, which is clearly not ideal. but it has given us two pieces of false confidence. The first is that since so much of the economy relies on consumer spending, we can't let those consumers fall too far, or else there will be nobody left to sell stuff to, right? Wrong. I have mentioned this statistic before, but for those who haven't heard it, 50% of all consumer spending is now done by just the top 10% of households. Now, that's a scary statistic by itself, but what it doesn't mention is that the bottom 60% of households now collectively account for less than 20% of the spending, and a growing share of that is being supported by risky consumer debt. The companies that have been performing best over the last 5 years have been in industries catering to wealthy consumers or to investor hype. Ferrari is now worth twice as much as Honda, and even Walmart is changing its business model to cater to more upmarket shoppers. More than 200 million people could drastically cut their spending tomorrow, and the total drop in economic activity could be covered over by increased spending on things like AI. In fact, it's kind of already happening. Personal consumption contributed less to economic growth than data center construction in the last reported quarter, and a majority of that consumption was done by just 10% of households anyway. Steve Eisman of Big Short fame did an extended interview on this a few days ago, and it goes into depth on a lot of the specifics, so I will leave a link to that down below. But in brief, this is more than just regular old inequality. Today we have something arguably worse: indifference. The lords of old at least needed their serfs to keep their empire operating. Today, not so much. As far as the economy is concerned, your ability to be a good little consumer is just a rounding error. And that leaves only your ability to work and your ability to invest. So it's time to learn how money works to find out why you don't matter anymore to the economy. This week's video is sponsored by Gamma, the tool that's changing the way people build presentations and content. If you haven't used it yet, Gamma makes it effortless to turn ideas into clean, professional decks without touching PowerPoint or Google Slides. Over 50 million people use it. It's basically the go-to workspace for modern presentations. They've just launched Gamma Agent, your built-in copilot that helps you work smarter, not just faster. Agent doesn't just—
I like that this is a video about why nothing matters anymore and everything is fake and how you don't matter to the economy, and it literally has a fucking AI PowerPoint generator ad in it.
Format slides. It researches, rewrites, and even fact-checks your content automatically. It can pull competitor insights right inside your deck or summarize a full article into polished slides in seconds. I tried it on one of my own decks, dropped in a URL, and within seconds it summarized the article into slides with citations already linked. I didn't have to open a single tab. It even suggested counterpoints to strengthen my argument, which saved me a ton of time prepping for a client pitch. It can also personalize a presentation for different audiences or reframe your tone, from casual to executive ready instantly. It's like having an editor, researcher, and designer built into one tool. You can try Gamma and see what Agent can do for your workflow using the link in the description. One important detail about your relationship with the economy is that, yeah, sure, your success might not mean that much to the economy anymore, but the success of the economy—
Thank you, Bad Guy Riri, for the 5 gifted subs. Hype Train Level 2, Piker Broadcasting Services, sponsored by you, the viewers. For you, the viewers. This is an ad-free broadcast unless we are doing an ethical react to a video such as this one, at which point I will obviously let his ad run through, considering that we're consuming his content and his labor here. But outside of that, you will never see an ad on the Piker Broadcasting Service unless I get a sponsorship opportunity from a video game company. Xylax with 100 gifted subs. God damn. Maybe all the YouTubers should create a bubble where they all sponsor each other in a circle to create infinite money. Open presents with a 25 big bones. God damn. Selectively mute. Thank you for the 5 gifted as well.
Also doesn't mean that much to you anymore. Over the last 40 years, personal productivity has doubled, even accounting for inflation. That means the average American is now producing twice as much as they were 40 years ago. And this has given even average people access to comforts, conveniences, and experiences that they just wouldn't have had back then. And yet, when asked, slightly more than half of you that responded still said you would prefer to live back then. So we are all remembering history through rose-tinted glasses, or has this doubling of economic output actually been totally irrelevant to average people? Well, as you might have guessed, our per capita production doubled, but incomes did not. Adjusted for inflation, median wages have increased by just 20% over the last 40 years, which is not great, but it's still not nothing. The median isn't skewed by the uber-rich like the average is, and that's 20% after inflation, so we should theoretically be 20% better off. And we are, but only in areas that don't really matter. Travel, technology, on-demand services, clothing, furnishes, and even food are all much more accessible today than they were back then, by a pretty wide margin. However, more essential items like housing, education, and healthcare have become far more expensive. So while you can, in theory, buy more stuff today with a perfectly middle-of-the-road income, it's not exactly the stuff that you need to build a comfortable life. The things that we wanted became cheaper, but the things that we needed fell out of reach. Which means, for a lot of people, their strongest tangible connection to economic prosperity is the car they are paying off over the next 84 months. But there is one much bigger factor which is a lot harder to capture with these numbers, and it's how people have earned that money. Your consumption may not matter to the overall economy, but the overall economy hasn't made it easy to consume the things you want. But something that has lost its relevance even faster is the work we are doing. 40 years ago, most jobs garnered far more respect from both employers and employees. Most workers in skilled...
Going to live in a fort made out of cheap TVs? Yeah. I mean, that's it. If you want shelter, just buy a bunch of televisions, okay? And then make a little baby fort for yourself. You can even turn the TV into a mattress if you want. This way we'll all have shelter, okay? Just treats. A bunch of different electrical equipment that you can purchase from China for as long as you can, for the record, because that's probably also going to go away the way things are heading with this tariff war. So get it while you can. Where do I put them? I'm saying you buy enough TVs so you can build a house out of TVs.
Or semi-skilled professions stayed with their employers for a long time, and laying off staff or getting fired was a massive deal. Today, losing your job at some point is the expectation. A lot of young workers treat it almost like a joke to make content out of, although this could be some kind of brain rot coping mechanism that I don't fully understand. Anyway, modern technologies have made a lot of jobs far more productive, but they have also made them far more user-friendly. As an example, a few decades ago, most large offices would have a small army of semi-skilled secretaries to put together presentations and information for reports. Something like making a graph in the prescribed corporate style would take a lot of time, but also—
Oh my God. This chatter just cracked the code. Las Vegas Sphere literally was made with TVs. Oh my God. The Las Vegas Sphere is unironically shelter made out of televisions when you think about it. Mike Moon, 22, thank you for the 10 gifted subs. And Iris Unknown, thank you for the 5 gifted. And Lizog, thank you for the 10. Delgado 305, thank you for the 5. And Chiron SCT, thank you for the 5 gifted. Take me down to the Roku City where the glass is pink and the TV's made cheaply.
To take some level of training to learn. Today, the company can just have an Excel template, and as long as someone can copy and paste 2 rows of data, they can do what used to be hours of work. Bank managers used to be highly respected professionals with a deep understanding of business finances, their local economy, and their extensive list of clients. Replacing one of these guys could take a full year of direct mentoring. Today, bank managers are glorified loan salesmen because credit reports and extensive electronic databases have taken the skill out of their jobs. Travel agents, junior analysts, stockbrokers, and an array of other jobs all mostly followed the same trend. These people became far more productive, but also far easier to replace. User-friendly and standardized technologies meant most people could get up to speed with a job within a week or two, as long as they knew
He just repeated his ad, yeah. He's like, why is the economy seemingly crashing for the average person? Right after doing an AI ad, talking about like how productivity can skyrocket and displace the pre-existing labor force. Like he literally said in the ad, with this AI tool, you no longer have the need to have like a researcher or a graphics design person or anything like that. You can do it all on your own by just like doing a couple inputs, which once again, for those of you who do not understand how this stuff works, like I am not opposed to efficiency. Okay. I'm not opposed to improving productivity. I am not anti-technological developments. The problem under capitalism is not that technology develops and it makes people more productive. The problem under capitalism is that when that productivity increases, capital owners use that as a mechanism of displacing the existing labor force. That's the issue. when productivity is increasing, it's not supposed to literally cause mass layoffs. It's supposed to lighten your workload. It's supposed to remove additional burdens from the existing labor force. And yet we don't operate that way because we live in a capitalist system.
How to use a suite of software. The promise or threat of AI, depending on who is asking, is that it could render your ability to work completely obsolete. But even if it simply continues this trend of standardizing roles, it will ultimately make workers more of a commodity that could be easily traded around an open market. Again, this raises the argument that if nobody can find a job anymore, then there will be nobody left to buy all of the stuff that companies are making.
What did you just do? I peeked to see my mom just drove up, and I wanted to see if she was coming in.
This is simply not true. Profit-motivated companies aren't going to hand over their valuable resources for nothing in return. For normal people, what they typically exchange for those goods and services is the hours in their day through something like a job, a contract, or maybe even working in their own business. But if these working hours are no longer valued by the market, then over time, companies are just going to start selling their products to people who can get their money through their investments, kind of like what is happening right now. In some tragic irony, this trend has gone so far that even multimillionaires are being pushed out of coveted goods and services by billionaires with more purchasing power.
I appreciate that because people don't think about the millionaires, right? Like, we get lumped in with the billionaires, but the millionaires really have it rough. Why are you guys saying f you?
Alright, so your consumption and your labor might not matter to the economy, but what about your ability to invest? It sounds like things are pretty sweet for those guys, right? Well, yes. Except for the fact that investments into productive capital, like all of the technology that's making you really easy to replace, is even more consolidated than consumption and income.
It's crazy because, like, am I crazy to assume that, like, how money works is an entire, like, media franchise that is designed to specifically not do this kind of commentary, but because conditions have gotten to such a degree that, like, you kind of have to. Because, like, this literally is, I mean, this guy's taking my job. This is what I'm supposed to be talking about. I mean, this is what I have been talking about for a while. I feel like the guys that are supposed to understand how money works are supposed to tell me, like, no, it's still good. Actually, there's a funny video about how the millionaires who live in the Hamptons are actually getting priced out by the billionaires. Yeah. This guy doesn't like the finance industry. He used to work there. No, this guy's always had a lefty perspective. I think he used to work in private equity. Okay, maybe I'm misunderstanding. Maybe this guy always was this way. I think I'm mistaking this for, like, isn't this like NPR? Like NPR's, doesn't NPR have like a branch similar to this? I mean, I don't suspect he's a Marxist. Maybe I'm thinking of like Economics Explained or something. Yeah. Or Market Watch. There's a bunch of different versions of this kind of like explaining how the markets work that are, to varying degrees, pumping neoliberal content. This is not one of those channels, very obviously. The Australian economics YouTuber Economics Explained is a neoliberal and is funded by private equity. Yeah, I'm thinking of a bunch of different ones that exist. But I mean, ultimately, I think we're going to see more and more people come to these conclusions.
Increased high-interest consumer debt also makes a lot of investing done by everybody else counterproductive. According to data from the Fed, the top 10% of households own more than 93% of corporate equities in America, but those same households only account for 5.4% of non-mortgage consumer debt. It's great that more people are getting into the market, but if you are paying off a 20% APR car loan and putting $500 a month into Robinhood, you are not an investor. You are just really bad at allocating capital. Now, what all of this means is that most economic participants don't really participate in their own economy. In the past, when average people struggled, the economy struggled, and wealthy people riding on that economy struggled too. Today, we could very well be in a situation where the majority make up such an insignificant share of market activity that even severe problems for them can be effectively drowned out by the party being had by a very small handful of people. Now, as far as social cohesion is concerned, this isn't great. But for the economy, it gets worse. We could see a situation where unemployment rises dramatically, but the economy continues to grow, because all of those laid-off people didn't contribute much to overall consumption or investment. In that case, taking action like lowering interest rates or giving out stimulus to help the unemployed—
I mean, that's literally the case right now. The top 1% of wealth in this country, top 10% of wealth in this country, I think, have like more than 50% of the, no, top 1% of wealth have 50% of all of the consumption in this country right now. Is it 1% or 10%? No, the top 10% of wealth own 90% of the stock market. But I think with overall consumption, I think it's literally, I think it's also, the top 10% of wealth in this country are responsible for 50% of all of the purchase being made in this country. 50% of all the consumption. That's fucking insane. That means that you can really continue the enshittification of everything and only focus on the top 10% of wealth with your goods and services, while 90% of the country is increasingly poorer and poorer, losing their jobs, and that dynamic will shift. So then 90% of the country is then at a servile state to the top 10% of wealth. We're already kind of seeing that with like Uber and the gigification of like other sectors, the gig economy in its entirety, where people are barely making ends meet, having to work multiple jobs, having to work long shifts. It's like it's a digital peasantry, a digital serfdom. And with increasing, with technological innovation in the surveillance side, and technological innovation in like controlling the way people feel about everything, with mass surveillance and also complete social media control in the hands of selected couple different billionaires, you can try to keep people at bay and make them focus on one another, make them focus on different villains. You are here right now. That is where we're at currently. As shit gets worse for the bottom 90%, which is every single person here, pretty much every single person in this chat, with the exception of someone like myself, okay? When your conditions get worse and worse, and the angrier you get, the more resentful you get, you tune into social media, you tune into media. The media is like telling you, yeah, shit's really fucked up. It's actually because of this or that. Shit's really fucked up. It's actually because immigrants. Shit's really fucked up because trans people exist. You should have Giannis Varoufakis on again to talk about these trends in the economy. I think that could be great to help people understand it from a left perspective. Yeah, things are really fucked up because the radical left has created too much communism in this country. That's what this is. That's why you should be angry at the radical left. You should be angry at the Antifa. You should be angry at trans people. You should be angry at migrants. You should be angry at the Democrats that are also representing the radical left.
Would risk further inflating already overinflated asset markets that didn't feel the pain to begin with, which would only make this problem even worse. Even the Fed essentially admitted that it was increasingly hard to enact policy that would help ordinary workers without helping out wealthy asset owners even more. But it gets worse. Average people might not have that much skin in the stock market game, but the 10% that are doing all of the spending do. The reason they are spending so much in keeping entire industries alive is because they feel wealthy thanks to their booming portfolios. If these asset markets falter, there is not going to be much left to prop everything up, and to use a technical term, we are going to be absolutely fucked. Now, this is normally the point where I would say to put away the tinfoil hat, because this is all the result of broken incentive structures and flaccid regulations, rather than some kind of deeper conspiracy. But the reality is, this all sounds very familiar. In 2006, a series...
I think Americans are uniquely servile too. Most people think they'll be rich one day, so it doesn't matter. A nation of temporarily embarrassed millionaires. Yes, I mean... the guy who coined that term literally lived through the Great Depression, and he coined the term at the time, you know? Steinbeck, who is attributed, I think it might not be the correct attribution, but is attributed with that quote, socialism will never work in the United States of America because the working class do not see themselves as an exploited proletariat, but temporarily embarrassed millionaires. It's a bar for those of you who read Grapes of Wrath.
Reports were leaked from Citigroup's asset management team dealing specifically with ultra-high net worth clients. In these reports, they described a plutonymy, a combination of plutocracy and economy where economic growth is powered by and largely consumed by a wealthy few. In a plutonymy, there is no such animal as the US consumer or the UK consumer, or indeed the Russian consumer. There are rich consumers, few in number, but disproportionate in the gigantic income and consumption they take. The rest are the non-rich, the multitudinous many, but only accounting for surprisingly small bites of the national pie. Now, the actual intention of this report was to encourage Citigroup's wealthy clientele to invest in companies that catered exclusively to...
It does make sense. It does make sense that, I mean, capitalism is so geared towards financialization and finance capitalism, which is where we're at right now. And finance capitalism in many ways is basically like, you know, gambling on steroids. I know people are going to get mad at me for saying that. They're going to say, how dare you say that? There's fundamentals, there's market fundamentals at play here. Okay, sure. But in that sense, it is, of course, identical to the casino model in general. The casino doesn't make money off of the regular foot traffic. The casino makes money off of the whales. And the economy right now is geared in the exact same way towards simply the consumers that are the whales, people in the top 10% of wealth in the American in the United States of America, who are responsible for 50% of the purchasing that takes place. The fundamentals are not there. No, I know the fundamentals are not there. There are even less fundamentals than sports betting. I would say that the stock market as it currently is designed is basically, the stock market as it's currently designed basically implies like you just always have to keep making gains. As long as you've reached a level of financial security where you have some upfront capital that you've accumulated either through intergenerational wealth in most circumstances because of an elevated position, or maybe you lucked into a growing sector or something, right? You made the right decisions. Oftentimes, once again, because you came from an upper middle class like financial background, so you can make the right networking decisions, whatever. You get into a situation like that, or you get immensely lucky, or all of those factors combined, you generate enough money, generate enough disposable income that you can enter the capital owning class. You get into the top 10% of wealth that way. And as long as your stock portfolio looks fine, you feel like your net worth is growing because you've entered a different class at that point. You no longer have to work to make money. Your money makes money for you. For the average person, on the other hand, of course, they always have to work to make money.
Other wealthy clientele, because the analysts predicted that they would eventually be the only ones worth selling stuff to. And remember, this report was published way back in 2005. Now, Citi has tried really hard to scrape this report off the internet, so I am going to go ahead and leave a link to it below. It's a dense investment thesis, but also genuinely very scary. Now, of course, there is still one way that you matter in the economy, and this report covered that as well. Whilst the rich are getting a greater share of the wealth and the poor a lesser share.
The real quote by Steinbeck is, I guess the trouble was that we didn't have any self-admitted proletarians. Everyone was a temporarily embarrassed capitalist. Maybe the communists so closely questioned by the investigation committees were a danger to America, but the ones I knew, at least they claimed to be communists, couldn't have disrupted a Sunday school picnic. Besides, they were too busy fighting amongst themselves. Some things never change.
Political enfranchisement remains as was: one person, one vote. In plain English, the biggest risk to their clients was that votes were somewhat evenly distributed. Fortunately for them, we are really bad at spending them wisely. Go and watch this video next to see just the latest example of people clearly voting against their own best interests, and don't forget to like and subscribe to keep.
Anyway, great stuff. But won't the top 10% of the economy still not eat itself when eventually they outprice themselves, like you said, as happened in the Hamptons? Yes, this is not a sustainable system. It will inevitably collapse.